Hello, fellow trainers, and welcome to Train the Trainer for Good Communicators Make Great Negotiators. So remember, this is a 2-hour class. A couple of things before I get started. You can see I have the booklet pulled up here. I just wanted to sort of explain the booklet. It's very vague. Really, there's just kind of 2 pages where we have each little agenda item and a place for them to take notes. So part 1 and then part 2. And then we have the quiz and the results to the quiz. And pretty much that's it. I tried to make this book as sparse as possible. But along with the booklet, I also created this follow-up piece that the reps can send out that has a little bit more detail to it. You can see some of the topics that we go over have sort of detailed lists that go with them. So I made a kind of a follow-up piece for that. Characteristics of a great negotiator, strong communication skills, the strategies for managing emotions. I feel like people might try to write all this down and just say, hey, look, you don't really need to write all this down. We're going to send it out after class. And then buyer negotiating scripts and seller negotiating scripts. We included those as well. And then discovery questions a buyer's agent can ask a listing agent to get more details. And then the summary points from the class as well. So this is a PDF that's in the follow-up folder. All right, so without further ado, I do think you should familiarize yourself with the booklet and the follow-up pieces in order to best teach the class. So let me go ahead and get started with the PowerPoint. So good communicators make great negotiators. I'm not going to go through and deliver this as, a 2-hour version here. I did put really good scripting with all of the slides, so you should be able to kind of read the script and figure out what's happening, but I will sort of give you some little tidbits and things that you need to know when teaching this class. So the first slide here is really to get the audience to buy in to the concept. So we want them to understand the benefits of great negotiating skills. And you can just read all of the following and kind of elaborate on each one. Obviously, the end when they're more money. So once they've kind of figured out that, hey, this is a skill that I need to have, which I don't think many real estate agents are going to argue with that. But we do want to get that buy-in in that initial slide. Then we have our agenda slide. The class is broken into 2 parts. Part 1 is kind of designed to get their brains thinking in a negotiating way. This is just the foundations of negotiating. And then in part 2 is where we're really going to talk more about negotiating tactics and things like that. So, let me back up one second. Don't feel the need to elaborate on each one of these things. Just read the agenda items because there are transition slides for each one of these agenda items. So there's no need to, go negotiating situations. We're going to talk about don't do that here on this slide. You're going to have the opportunity to do that on each one of the transition slides. So part 1, the foundations of negotiating. Negotiating situations is where we're going to start today. The first thing we're going to discuss is the one-time negotiating situations. These are the garage sale, flea market, antique shop type items. You can ask them, can anyone think of any more? And they might say, yes, children and family. We got to negotiate the kid eating the broccoli, things like that. And then multi-point negotiation. This situation is more like a game of chess. Each party has multiple opportunities to play and should always be considering, if I do this, then they'll likely do this. Now on this slide, you can read the header there. In a multiple point negotiation, the goal is, and you don't have to read the whole quote. As you click, I've highlighted the important parts. All parties have their needs satisfied. They are internally motivated to fulfill their commitments, subsequent negotiations and transactions with the same party. So As you probably figured out, the multi-point negotiation is what we're going to encounter the most in real estate. So working with sellers, also working with buyers, and then of course negotiating the transaction itself. We're going to talk more about each one of those items toward the end of class. But again, we want to kind of understand the different scenarios in which you might be negotiating. Now, this next section is where they're going to take the quiz. So discovering your negotiating style, the quiz is on page 3 and 4 of their booklet. Let them know you're going to give them 10 minutes, and you can read the slide here. Circle the answer that best describes yourself in a real estate negotiating situation. When you're ready to start the timer, just give it a click. It'll take just about half a second to start counting down. See, there it goes. Just know that. If you get, you think it's not working and you click again, then you're going to click off of that slide. But it'll start counting down for you. You might recommend that when everyone's finished that they put their pencils down so you know that everyone's done. If they don't need the whole 10 minutes, you can kind of just skip through that if everybody finishes quicker. And then tell them that you're going to calculate the results. Count the number of times that you selected each letter. And then, of course, the letter that was circled the most is their dominant negotiating trait. Then you'll go over the results. So a couple of ideas for this. These results are in the booklet as well, like I showed you already. You could say, hey, was anybody an A? And then have the A's or someone from the A group read these answers. Or you could read them yourself, kind of just gauge your audience on that. B's, C's, D's, but you'll go through the results with them and probably discuss that a little bit as well. And then E's. Now, we're going to jump into identifying characteristics of a great negotiator. So we've sort of established what their negotiating style is. Let's look at some characteristics of a great negotiator. First, they have strong listening skills. They ask open-ended questions. So these are all just fly-ins, and I've elaborated on each one of these in the scripting. And I like this question because people tend to really, get involved there. Have you been in a negotiating situation where it became clear that someone was lacking one or more of these characteristics? And they'll typically chime in on that as well. If you hear some odd squeaking in the background, it is my desk chair, I promise. Okay, so the next slide, we have this funny little GIF, and you can say something to the effect of like, I know you've all wanted to speak to that co-op agent like this, or you've had a situation where your seller made you feel like this, but this is really not the best communication style. So let's identify some strong communication skills. And then you're going to go through each one of these as well. And I have these in the notes. I've elaborated on each one of these in the instructor notes. Becoming a great negotiator. So now we're transitioning into part 2 of the class. Managing emotions. So this can be a very vital part in becoming a great negotiator. Neuroscience has proven it. People make emotional decisions and justify them with logic. What are some common emotions in negotiating? You'll click through. Actually, before you click through, ask the audience. Get them to give you some ideas, and then you can give them the following ideas. So strategy number 1, focus on the goal. And I believe that I elaborated on each one of these in the scripting or the notes section, so you can kind of follow along with that. Focus on the goal. Strategy 2, be empathetic. Strategy 3, don't spend too much time on any one point. Strategy 4, ask small commitment questions. Strategy 5, avoid rushing the client. Same, I put details in the notes on all of these. Strategy 6, managing emotions, is handling and preventing objections. And then strategy 7, ask the hard questions. Being proactively aware. You might say, what is being proactively aware? But You always have to be on the lookout for data and clues. So I call this sort of being a detective, because without data, you're just another person with an opinion. So how do we go about being a detective? Well, the first thing we can do is be a good listener. Do not listen with the intent to reply, but with the intent to understand. I like that quote. Contextual listening in real estate. And you can just read through each one of these and explain the importance of listening with context, listening to find answers rather than just, listening to figure out what's next. You're listening to get answers about people. Use discovery questioning. Ask questions to get more details. So for example, you could ask a buyer, what will this move accomplish for you? Ask the seller, what criteria are you going to use in hiring a listing agent? Just flat out ask them. I like these two questions. Ask the buyer's agent, how well do you know your buyer? And then you can do the same for the listing agent. How well do you know your seller? A lot of times the other agent will overspeak and they'll talk too much and they'll say, oh, I know my seller really well. Sam and Sally have been married for a long time and they put their house on the market because sadly they're going through a divorce. And before you know it, they've divulged all the information that you need. So another great way to use discovery questioning or kind of ask the right questions is to use the acronym FORD. So it stands for family, occupation, recreation, and dreams. If you understand these 4 things about people, you can better understand what their overall goal is, what motivates them. I think I elaborate on this in the notes section as well. So reading signals in real estate. And you're just going to read through each one of these bullet points. And I think I elaborated on this in the notes as well. And then ask them, have you encountered any signals? A lot of times they'll come up with funny stories that, led on to the fact that the seller was getting a divorce or whatever the case was. Do engage them in this conversation. How can you avoid sending those signals when you're on the listing side? Explain signals to your seller, who likely won't realize that buyers and their agents will be looking for clues. And so just read through these clues as well. And then, I thought about putting, this is just instructor note here, I thought about putting a slide for the whole seller surveillance situation and that buyers shouldn't talk about things on the porch in front of the Ring doorbell and all of that. But that can be a can of worms, and we have to be careful when we're talking about that. It's likely that someone will bring this up for sure, and you can speak to it. I would say just maybe educate yourself. We have that collateral piece about, is your seller surveillance putting them at risk, and kind of know what that looks like, because there are some implications for the seller, but you're going to get pushback on well, the seller can do whatever they want in their own home and that kind of thing. And then, I think what I always say in my legal class is the best line of defense is just talk to your clients about that and educate them. If you're the buyer's agent, let your buyers know that they could be being recorded, and not to, leave all the cookies at the door and say, oh, we love this property, we'll pay anything for it. And then guess what? The sellers heard that on their Ring doorbell. And I'm telling you, those Ring doorbells, you can hear people out in the, across the street talking. So let your buyers know to keep all their comments to themselves and maybe talk in the vehicle. And then listing agents, let them know that we have that collateral piece to better inform their seller, but just stay neutral on the thing and try not to give too much advice about all of that. If you need more answers, let me know and I can explain deeper. But anyway, I wanted to bring that up, but I didn't want to put the slide there just because if you can skim by it and not have to have that conversation, then just don't. Let's talk about negotiating tactics. classic negotiating styles. You're just going to go through each one of these, and I've elaborated on them in the notes so you can kind of give examples of each one. And then you're going to talk about these different scenarios. So working with sellers, negotiating the sales price, the commissions, decluttering and staging, and then accepting the buyer's counteroffer. So how can you convince your seller not to list the property above market value? Get some of their opinions. I think this is a great way for them to talk amongst themselves and give each other examples. I put examples in the notes section. What are some ways you overcome the commission objection? Again, there's examples, but they might have some good scripting for this. The scripting that's in the follow-up piece addresses some of these items. The decluttering, how do you explain the importance of decluttering and staging? We've got this wonderful marketing piece that you can utilize to kind of give your seller some ideas for ways to declutter. Hey, look, it's not as hard as you think it is, that kind of thing. How can you persuade your seller to accept the buyer's counteroffer? And this is where we can plug our Independence Title Agent 1 app. I like the idea of, using the report that shows them the carrying cost. The longer your house is on the market, the more it costs you. So go ahead and accept that buyer's offer. Working with buyers. How do you persuade buyers to use you as their agent? Each one of these, you're asking the audience, letting them give you some ideas, and then I have ideas in the notes if you don't get a lot of interaction. Hopefully you do. So what if your buyers want to submit a lowball offer? That's a good one. How do we talk our buyers out of that? What type of scripting do we use? And we need to be familiar with the market. We need to let them know, what this situation looks like. So again, examples for this in the notes. How can you persuade the buyer to accept the seller's counteroffer? So again, I plug the Independence Title Agent 1 app, and I like this geo report. We can remind them that this property feeds to the elementary school that they really want their kids to go to, and that it meets all of their other needs, and they're really just being too picky about the seller's counteroffer. However you want to word that, but it's close to the Starbucks that you wanted to get your coffee at every morning. It really meets all of your needs, and I like that geo report for that. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to negotiate between your clients? We got husband and wife that aren't agreeing, or we got the couple that can't, make up their mind about the property. Ask them this question. They'll come up with probably stories and things that they can tell you about. And then how do you negotiate between the two of them and kind of bring them to common ground? Negotiating the transaction. So this is where we talk about the buyer's agent must do their research, review MLS data, and then you can kind of read each one of those bullet points there. And then they need to review other data as well. They need to have as much information as they can before they're going to submit an offer. Okay, and then read each one of these bullet points. And then we have to be proactive and not reactive. So there's some really good examples for this that are in the note section. You can kind of read through these. If you're working with a buyer, you really want to set them up and help them understand the market. If we're in multiple offer situations, let them know as soon as they find a property, they need to be willing to move on it. Maybe with sellers, talk to sellers about doing a pre-inspection. A pre-inspection can head off a ton of negotiating nightmares. If you need more info about a pre-inspection, let me know and I can talk you through that as well, but I'm hoping or thinking we all know what that concept is. Be strategic when presenting offers and counteroffers. I think on this slide, we're just talking about the different ways to present offers and counteroffers. We're so caught up in the digital age and have gotten so accustomed to just emailing offers and emailing them to the seller and then sending them back to the buyer and all that kind of stuff, where it might require a phone call or a sit down to really explain the pros and cons of an offer or a counter offer to head off any negotiating nightmares. So do explain that, talk through that with them. And then on this final slide, in conclusion, we want to go around the room. So you're going to ask them to name one negotiating strategy that you would like to implement. And then you can just say, hey, I've put some examples here on the screen in case you didn't remember exactly all of them or that type of thing. So they can kind of go around the room and they might say, oh, I really, want to work on managing emotions and helping my clients through that process, or I really need to do more research before I submit an offer. However they, explain that. And then the final slide, we will leave you with this from John F. Kennedy. Let us never negotiate out of fear, but let us never fear to negotiate. Yay, the end. Have a great day. That is Good Communicators Make Great Negotiators.